Good morning, everybody. It is really a pleasure to be here and to be able to talk to people not through a screen. Today, to be honest, am not from the bicycle industry, so I guess you could call me some kind of outsider. But my background does come from an industry that was famously founded or originated from the bicycle industry. They were, and as you perhaps know, they were founded by Wilbur and Orville Wright. They were innovators at heart, and they were also outsiders. Maybe it was because they were outsiders that they managed to create this entire new industry and do something that the aeronautical engineers at the time were not able to do. They were real innovators in many ways. They thought radically, but they were also very methodical about how they studied and analyzed the data, did measurements, and designed every individual part of what first wireless on it works again. The first airplane. And when I went, and this is what that very first airplane looked like, right? This is the Wright Flyer, 1903. And when I came to Taiwan already a few months ago, 100 years later, this is what an airplane looks like. There's a massive amount of innovation that's happened in design, materials, manufacturing, quality control, safety systems, electronics. Everything has changed drastically. But I started studying aerospace engineering 100 years after the Wright brothers sold their last bicycle, which looked like this. And I can be very honest with you, the bicycle that I took to my lectures every morning didn't look very different from this. So you can conclude two things as an outsider. One, this is already an amazing piece of engineering that no one has been able to improve on this design for 120 years. And then the other thing I think is, what could I possibly do to make this better? Because it's already been the same. But luckily, that doesn't mean that innovation has stopped, because there's a lot of things changing now that make new things possible. And that's kind of what I want to introduce today. What are the things that are changing today that are making new innovations in this industry possible? And one of the important ones that I see, and I think a lot of you have understand, is circular economy and the environmental impacts of all of the industries, but specifically also mobility, and what kind of new opportunities that brings us. And obviously, I think Brian already introduced what the digital technologies and the electronics advances in electronics and electrical systems has brought, is also bringing great new opportunities for innovation. And the last one is really what customer expects from a product. And that has changed as well. And also with Marco's interesting presentation here for how much we tailor the experience to the final user. And that's also something that's becoming more and more possible. But maybe what is circular economy? Because that's really how our startup started looking at things. What is circular economy and what opportunities does it bring us? And I'm not going to give you a lot of details here because the next speaker pretty much wrote the book on circular economy for the bicycle industry. So I'll listen to that one, but I want to run through a few important concepts, and especially this diagram, which helps you think about what you can do and where the areas are you can innovate if you want to become part of the circular economy. The first part is what comes into the system, so before you get into the use phase. And actually, the first question you should ask yourself is, do I need to make this, right? If you don't make something, then you're not wasting anything. And that's basically the first step. But obviously, you want to keep your customers happy, so you need to start making something. And then you start to rethink of how can you make that? Can you use less materials? Can you use less energy to produce it, and think of how you can do that to reduce those inputs into your system, and also think about how you can change your product so that it can be used better later on. Then we get into the use phase, and basically everything in the use phase is geared towards maximizing the lifespan of your product somehow. Right? So either you can reuse that product, so you can sell it secondhand, and Decathlon, for example, has a very good system to recover products that they have and sell them again secondhand without having to do much to them. Just make sure that it finds a new home. And then, of course, there's all kinds of design things that you can do, also with the 3D printing, for example, but you can find ways to repair your product and keep it in use as it is as long as possible. And then there's remanufacturing and refurbishing, which actually takes the product back and can make it new or even better than new. I think if you look at the statistics in engine development, for example, in the internal combustion system, remanufactured truck engines have a lower failure rate than original new machines coming off the line. And then as last, you have repurposing, which is trying to find new ways to use the parts, the components, the materials in some second, third, or fourth life of the product. So you can think of second life batteries, third life batteries, etc. And as a final stage, you can disassemble your entire part, disassemble the components that it's made of, and recycle those components. And basically everything here is geared towards keeping that use phase as long as possible. And if that's no longer possible, then we go to try to minimize this, but we try to recover the energy and the energy that we've put into the system. And ideally, we send nothing to landfill. So very much this gives you all of the tools that you want to do. And one of the examples I like to use in this industry that was one of the leading, especially with links to the electronics in Taiwan, is Fairphone. And Fairphone set out to design their product from the beginning to be repairable. And this has had all kinds of ramifications, but basically it allows your customer to repair the individual components of their phone that fail. But what it has also meant is that they've been able to give their customers a 5-year guarantee on the use of their product, whereas most people think after a year, maybe it's time I get the iPhone 13. But what this has also done is has driven a lot of change in their supply chain. And here in Taiwan, that has given some suppliers a leading position in manufacturing components with fully recyclable plastics, for example. But what's interesting to notice and what is important to remember if you're thinking about working in the circular economy or working towards the circular economy, is that basically everything is geared towards maximizing that use phase. And what does that mean? If you want to build or remain a viable business in the circular economy, you must be very well positioned to generate revenue from use. Because if you keep a product that lasts forever, you can sell it once, and then you're out of business. So you need to think about ways, how can you generate revenue from use? Because today, innovation is not so much about the products or creating new products, it's about tailoring services to your customers' needs. And this is exactly where service models come in. That's where they have their strength. Or subscription models like we're talking about. So if it's a bit, there's all kinds of definitions, and I think everybody has a subscription. You'll have a Netflix account, or maybe an Office 365, or if you're really into it, you might have fresh groceries delivered to your front door once a week. But basically, there's a lot of different definitions, and the way I like to think about it, or to make it clear for yourself, is to think, how often does your customer pay you, and what are they paying you for? So on the one side, right, your customer is paying you for a product, and that's it. And on the other hand, they pay you every time they achieve some kind of outcome. So if you were to think of this in the bicycle industry, right, your customer would come to your shop, buy a bike, and then you say goodbye. Or if you're thinking of it as a mobility need, they would take a U-bike to come to this presentation, and they would pay you for that one step, and when they leave again, they pay you again. And if you look at it this way, it becomes a very powerful way of framing how you deliver value to your customer. Because in a product-based business, the only thing you can do to grow is to sell more products, increase the price of your product, or reduce the cost of that product. Whereas if you're working with customers and subscribers, basically all of your focus goes to acquiring those customers and making sure you can retain those customers for as long as possible and increase the value you can deliver to those customers. And subscription-based models are very different from product-based models, and the entire supply chain is very different from that. And actually there's a Taiwanese-born author that has grown his company into a multi-billion-dollar business, helping businesses think in subscription models. Because instead of building a product and launching your next hit product, you're thinking about what is the service and the experience you want to deliver to that individual customer, and how do I arrange my supply chain, my channels, to be able to deliver that. But what is perhaps even more interesting about thinking about product versus service models is that when you sell a product, you're selling something to someone, and the only thing you validate at that point is the perceived value that that customer has of that product, because they don't know how they're going to use that product in the future. When you sell a service, they're paying you for the real value they immediately get when they pay you, right? I know I'm going to get from the metro station to the presentation if I pay for that trip or my Uber. And that makes it and it happens much more often, right? So I do that many times. So that gives you a lot of more data points to measure the value the real value you're delivering to your customer. And that really speeds up your innovation. So it allows you, so what I find very powerful about subscription models, and why I think it's critical for every company to think about how they can go into service or subscription-driven models, is that it allows you to iterate much faster in terms of your innovation, because you're measuring real feedback from your customers. It allows you to grow your market share, because you're no longer focused on selling products, but just acquiring and keeping those customers. And most importantly, it allows you find a sustainable way to get into a circular economy. So one of the famous examples in the Netherlands at the moment is Swapfiets. I don't know if any of you know Swapfiets, but basically the only thing they promise, and it's a very simple thing they promise, is that their subscribers always have a working bicycle for 20 bucks a month. Now, if you do the maths in your head, you're spending a lot of money for a relatively cheap bicycle, right? But they have managed to grow to almost 250,000 subscribers in the 8 years that they've been, or 7 years that they've been going. And they're active in more than 70 cities. And this is a really powerful area where there's a lot of development at the moment. So just the first 2 months of this year, more than $400 million has been invested into startups that are working in shared micromobility. So e-bikes, e-steps, but also these kind of subscription models. And Swapfiets is very interesting, because I think this is a company that would be very difficult, a company to start that would be very difficult to start from within a traditional company, because it goes against the financing structure, the innovation structure, the distribution channels you would typically use. They've built this all up by themselves, and were very difficult to do from within, let's say, the Axel group. But what's interesting in this case is that they're a majority-owned company now by PON, right, which is the biggest, arguably the biggest bicycle conglomerate at the moment. And PON realized that this is a way to grow their market share, but they would never be able to do that within one of their own brands. So is this just reinventing the wheel, and what is there left for us to do? We've gone from an age where the bicycle itself hasn't really changed so much, but the way that you can get customers and engage with customers has grown significantly. What is also very interesting with Swapfiets is because they're measuring real-time feedback when people stop their service and not, and they can also measure what's going wrong with their bicycles immediately because they see the bicycles come back. They've been able to redesign components on that bicycle or have them redesigned so that the failure rates go down significantly, because the only thing they want to guarantee is that you always have a working bicycle. But now we're moving to the age from normal bicycles to electric bicycles, and we've already seen also with Acer, there's a lot of interesting opportunities once you start digitalizing the product, because now suddenly you can get data in a completely different spectrum. And that's where Swugo, my startup, comes in. We're a startup trying to basically revolutionize the way that we power electric bicycles or micromobility in general. And it started, we haven't been around for a long time. It started maybe a summer or so, 2 summers ago, when I was walking in Amsterdam, and I walked past a bicycle repair shop, and I saw something crazy. So I asked the mechanic what she was doing, and she said she was converting the electric bicycle she had into a normal bicycle. And I said, why would you rip the heart out of a 3,000 euro bicycle to sell it secondhand for maybe 100, 150 euros? You know what she told me? She told me that the battery was too expensive to replace, and without a working battery, an electric bicycle is useless. I guess you can all agree with that. And that's where the problem that we see, is that batteries are still a major headache for the e-bike industry, which is relatively young. And especially if you compare it to the EVs. Because batteries, on the one hand, complex, you have all kinds of safety issues that you need to take care of. And your customers and the users usually do not have the right expertise. In fact, if you ask someone how they should treat their battery of their bicycle, depending on how old they are, they'll give you a different stand of operating procedures, right? And the other thing is that for end users, the battery is an extremely expensive part of your bicycle. It's almost 30% of the bill of materials often. And on top of that, generally, it has a relatively low lifespan compared to the rest of the product. And this makes it very difficult, especially now in Europe. If you look at the statistics, more than 50% of the consumer electronic batteries are also still landing up in landfills. So it's also on an environmental point, a tough point. And that's basically what we want to change. We have developed an electrification as a service where we transform the most expensive part of a battery, of a bicycle, electric bicycle, into a revenue generating asset for us or our customers. And basically we've enabled the first subscription service that powers and protects any bicycle. So we've developed, together with our partners, a drivetrain that we provide as a service to our users. And we've launched our first pilot with one of the biggest, or the biggest bicycle supplier in Leuven, Belgium. And this is a circular bike shop that refurbishes, repurposes, and sends out bicycles based on existing frames. And they were looking for solutions to develop circular e-bikes. And we've been really happy with the positive feedback that we've had, and they've even preponed when we were going to launch with them. We're supposed to launch in the summer, and they really want to start expanding to their customer base already next month, which obviously, considering supply chain issues at the moment, is going to be fun, especially for a very small company like us. And on top of that, it's given us the room to look at how can we make those batteries better, because we do not actually sell the battery to the customer. We do not generate revenue from selling a battery again to the customer. We generate revenue from that battery being able to deliver power to the customer every time. So we are looking at ways of making that battery repairable and refurbishable. And here again, we're working with some fantastic forward-looking Taiwanese partners, and we're launching a product in a couple of months with this partner to basically develop leading-edge technology on how we can build repairable batteries for our system. As I said, we're a relatively young startup, but we're already proud of what we've been able to achieve so far. Last year, we were voted one of the top 10 mobility startups by the European Institute of Technology and Innovation. And we've been very grateful for all kinds of support from the European and the Dutch government, from funding to get all kinds of research on the basic components that we've done. And what I'm most proud of is that we recently got invested by IMEC iStart, which is arguably the best deep tech accelerator in Europe. So if you're also interested in unlocking the potential of circular subscription-based revenue for your e-bike business, then please reach out to me and connect on LinkedIn, and I'll be glad to talk to you and see what kind of solutions that we can deliver to you. Thank you.